This is episode 274 of the Andrew Hines Real Estate Investing Podcast. Welcome back to the show. Today I have Shawn DiMartile on, and he is coming at us from San Diego, California, where he does infill developments. And you may have heard people joke over the years about how Ontario and California are very similar. And from everything Shawn said on today's episode, I heard a lot of similarities. So Shawn really worked through with us how he goes about mitigating risk in these large-scale development projects. We specifically talked about a project that he's working on, which he bought two houses for about $1.6 million each, and he's combining the lots and he's tearing them down and building a 30-unit multifamily building, which will be rented out, stabilized, and eventually sold. Obviously, there's a lot of risk when you get into doing multifamily development, when you get into doing any sort of development. One of the nice things that Shawn mentioned here is that he doesn't have to rezone the properties. The zoning that is there already has the permissions to build what he wants to, so that's known as of right zoning. So really it's more of a permitting process and working with an architect and getting a design that works and conforms. And he talked all about how he brings people onto his team that are going to allow him to make better decisions, be more profitable, and not try and go with the lowest price contractor, but to go with a contractor that is going to do a good job and ultimately going to save money in the long run by not making mistakes. And he gave specific examples of that. So I'm confident there's a lot of gold nuggets to be had from this episode, and you're going to enjoy it. If this is new to you and some of this terminology is new to you, this podcast has advanced over the 5 years it's been running. So I highly encourage you to head right back to early episodes, episodes 1 through 10 or 1 through 20 to get a grasp of the basics and then come right on back up to modern episodes. And please show the channel some love in the process. Give it a 5-star rating and review on whatever podcast platform you're listening or watching on. And without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the episode with Shawn DiMartile. Hello and welcome to the Andrew Hines Real Estate Investing Podcast. I have Shawn DiMartile on the show, and I was just on his show, so we're doing the other version here. So I get to interview you this time.
I'm looking forward to it, man. And we had a great interview on my podcast. You're an easy guy to interview, so I appreciate you coming on.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think it goes with the biz if you do this.
Yeah.
Also, I've just always been a bit of a talker. So anyways, yeah, Shawn, you're in California, correct?
Yeah, I'm in San Diego, California.
Awesome. Okay, so that sounds like a much warmer climate than I'm in right now.
Yeah, we're the opposite.
Yeah, the opposite. We're very cold here right now. It's unfortunate. But tell me a little bit about what you do. I know you had alluded to some of this when I was talking to you on your podcast. But you're it sounded like you did some multifamily for a time. I don't know if you're still doing that. Maybe if you could just give a high level of your story getting into real estate, what you do now, and we can go from there.
Sure. So I used to be an air traffic controller before I quit that job. I was an air traffic controller for 11 years, leading up to me going all in on real estate. And I jumped when my first forte into real estate was multifamily. I jumped right into commercial multifamily. Because I basically went down the rabbit hole with studying real estate and kept arriving at that as being the most scalable option and, has a lot of benefits for the economies of scale. So my first project I ever did was actually a 32-unit apartment just outside of Indianapolis. And that project went really well. JV'd on that project with a couple partners. And then fast forward, we started getting more obsessed with real estate, started our own podcast 4 years ago, and real estate meetup, and basically everything you'd read in any book that suggests what you should do when you're getting stared, we did it.
So I did all the same things, except for the multifamily buy. Yeah,
right, yeah, instead of maybe doing that first. But we ended up meeting a mentor on our podcast that agreed to be our mentor, and it's still to this day is our mentor. His name's Tony Azar, and he's got over 8,000 apartment units and has been doing it for a long, long time. So we started to syndicate apartments with our mentor. We syndicated 150 unit and then 145 unit. And then me and my business partners bought a boutique hotel. We also have numerous Airbnbs between us. And so we've kind of pivoted from trying different strategies depending on what we were seeing in the market. And so today, what we're focusing on is actually ground up development and infill development in San Diego, California. There's a lot of reasons why we're doing that, but today we still own all of those syndicated properties, with the exception of the hotel we sold last year and that very first 32 unit we sold the year prior. But today the focus is 100% on building here in San Diego.
And tell me what caused you to make that pivot? Like, you didn't like the multifamily space? Did you feel like it moved too slow? Was it a scalability thing? What was it?
So we're building multifamily here, smaller multifamilies. We've got a 10 unit, a 30 unit, and soon a 34 unit that we're building, all of them less than a mile from the beach. And the decision really, came from a couple things. Number one, value add multifamily over the past 2 years has just gotten increasingly difficult to pencil. And that's due to a gajillion factors. I mean, the demand is extremely high for value add multifamily. There's a lot of competitors that have gone into the space over the last 5 years. It seems like everybody's tried to start syndicating multifamily. So that has driven prices and competition up. And we're talking, you make an offer on a property, and there could easily be 10 offers on it that you're competing with. So trying to get a good deal has become more difficult, not impossible. In addition to that, we really wanted to focus in our own backyard, which is San Diego. That's where we live, me and my business partners. We've been investing out of state considerably, but we wanted to bring it in-house so that we can vertically integrate with our own property management, so that we can cater to our investors. Most of our investors live in California. They believe in California. They know about the shortage of housing, et cetera. And so those factors were making us increasingly interested in focusing here in San Diego, California. But really what was the catalyst and made all of the world of a difference was the new density bonus programs that San Diego has come up with. So to provide a little context for you guys, San Diego is basically ground zero for the housing crisis. It is the most competitive rental market in California. On average, 17 renters are competing for the same apartment. It has some of the highest rent growth year over year that we've seen because of the housing shortage. The median home price in San Diego is right at $1 million. I think it's like $980,000 last I checked. Most people are priced out of ever owning their own home in San Diego, and they need to rent. But you combine all of this demand pressure with limited supply, and the fact that San Diego has some of the least amount of available land to build in the country, because we're geographically constrained. We have the Pacific Ocean to the west, Mexico to the south, expensive mountainous terrain, expensive to build on mountainous terrain to the east of us, and then Camp Pendleton to the north. And basically, all of the flat buildable land has been accounted for. So the city has two programs that they're using to increase density. And it's basically the bonus ADU program and the complete communities program. And essentially, in the shortest way I can explain it, what this does is it allows developers to go and purchase existing properties. So this could be an existing single family home that's sitting on a multifamily lot. This could be in the case of one of our projects, we bought 2 houses side by side, less than a mile from the beach. We're tearing them down and building a 30-unit apartment complex. Or, it could be even taking an existing small multifamily, tearing it down and building a much larger one. So they've increased the density allowed on certain lots, depending on where they're located and what their base zoning is. Oftentimes you can build much more than what was previously allowed. And these programs in San Diego are unique. So, for example, the bonus ADU program doesn't exist anywhere else in the country. It only exists here. And the complete communities program as well is unique to San Diego. So they've given us these incentives to build new apartments in neighborhoods that it would be impossible to build them. So a perfect example is the Pacific Beach neighborhood of San Diego, which is basically the main beach in San Diego. This is one of the main draws for people in their 20s and 30s. It's full of the bars, restaurants, etc. Over the past 10 years, you can count the number of new buildings that have been built on 2 hands. And most of the properties we're competing against were built in the 50s and 60s. So I kind of went on a tangent there, but essentially we're now able to build a brand new product that's really attractive to the renters here for a fraction of the cost that we could then sell it for. So, for example, we can build for anywhere from $300,000 to $400,000 per unit on all-in cost, and these are now worth north of $600,000 per unit when it's time to sell them.
And when you're factoring that number, is that all in? Is that after paying your carrying costs and all that?
That's after everything. That's after purchasing the land, paying architects, all your soft costs, all of your hard costs, all of your holding costs, everything.
What are your construction hard costs per square foot?
Out here, that can vary depending on the size of the project. If you've got a little bit of economies of scale and you're north of 30 units or around that number, you can expect to spend $300 a square foot. If you're doing something like a 10 unit, that could be $350 to $400 a square foot.
It's quite a bit more than Florida. I built some houses in Florida at like 107.
Yeah, and
yeah.
Out here in California, Southern California, labor costs are extremely high. I mean, if you've been doing construction for a number of years, the typical construction guy is making $80,000 plus for their income. So it's everything is more expensive here across the board. There's nothing that's not.
Right. Okay. So you talked about, and that sounds very familiar to Ontario. Like everything you're describing is basically the same thing here. They have ADU programs here. Now they've done sweeping stuff across the province to allow up to 3 units in any municipality. So any single family house, you should be able to do 3, and some municipalities it's 4, which is just a recipe for chaos, in my opinion. But hey, it is what it is. So from an investor standpoint, though, people are interested in it because it obviously, if the numbers work, they work. So give me an example. You said you're tearing down 2 houses side by side. What did you buy those 2 houses for? Like $1 million each, like you said?
No, these were about $1.6 million each.
Okay, so a little bit nicer, or maybe a better location to justify the higher.
Yeah,
value.
I mean, you're in one of the most sought after locations. And by the way, that we paid and these aren't nice homes. These are homes that could have been flipped, or these are homes that are, one of them isn't livable, really.
Fit for a tear down, basically.
Yeah, we're buying them to tear them down and build a new complex. But the location is 0.7 miles from the beach. You could walk to all the major bars. It's literally next door to a Sprouts, 2 blocks away from Trader Joe's. It's a very premium location, so that's not far fetched for a price here and where that's at in San Diego.
Yeah, I'm just gonna pull up a sheet here and run through these numbers loosely. If my computer will speed up, but so you paid 3.2 then to get it to be all in with those, and you're not going to sell them individually. Is the plan to hold them?
Yeah, the plan is to hold them, and this is going to be they're both being torn down. The lots are being combined, so you can combine the 2 lots to make it 1 parcel, and then build a 30-unit apartment complex on top of that, 3 stories.
That's pretty cool, man.
Yeah.
So what do you think you're going to be, how will your BRRRR work out there? I'm assuming that's kind of the model. You're going to go in, refinance, or do you have construction financing lined up for this?
So this is going to be, it's not going to be a BRRRR. It's likely going to be, a 5-year project plan. We are going to eventually sell it. So I should clarify, when I said we weren't going to sell them individually, we're not going to sell each unit individually or the separate buildings or something like that. But the property is going to get sold. That is the plan.
Okay.
When it comes to the construction debt, I think was one of your questions. That isn't locked up yet. Generally speaking, we won't be able to lock that in until we're close to entitlements being completed. I mean, this project is just being submitted for permits, so we're still at least 14 months out before we'll be able to lock in our construction debt. But it's essentially going to be 3 different forms of debt. You've got essentially a bridge loan to get us to the construction phase. Then you go into construction debt. And with a lot of our local lenders, they have, or some of the local lenders have products that will construction directly to perm. But if we're not able to get one of those, we would have to get a construction loan and then refinance into perm debt once it's built. But the plan is to construct the apartment, hold it for at least 1 year for tax purposes, because if this property isn't rented out for at least a year, then it's taxed as ordinary income.
Yeah, versus capital gains.
Yep, versus capital gains, right? So we're going to hold it for at least 1 year, and depending on where the market's at, assess if that's the best time to sell, or maybe hold for another year or two.
Yeah, that's obviously a wise plan. So capital gains for you in California, would that be just taxed on half of it versus taxed on the whole thing?
Yeah.
Okay. Used to be that way here. They just changed it, so it's going to be 66%. People are all upset.
Oh, wow.
All right. So purchase for 3.2, and then you said total cost of the project is going to be how much?
So the total cost of this project, we're going to be, for this one's going to be a little bit more. So this is because this is going to have some subterranean parking. So we're going to be at around 450, or about 450K per unit, all in. And that includes the purchase of the land. That includes the subterranean parking. That includes everything.
So you said 32 units?
30.
30, sorry. All right. So that's a 1.35, or is that 13? I need to turn on my my dollar signs here. It's been one of those days. Okay, yeah.
It's okay, man.
1.35 was way too low. All right. So yeah, 13.5 million to build, 3.2 to buy. So you're all in for...
So that was all that the price that what I just gave you, that was the all in. That includes the
that's
buy.
all
Sorry.
in. Okay, so
that
you're
is all in. There's nothing left out.
All in cost. Okay, all in cost at 13.5, and then what do you figure that's worth? You said it's $650 a unit.
This particular project is going to be closer to 700K a unit due to the location and the rents we're going to be able to achieve. So this is going to be closer to the range of 19 to 20 million plus.
So hypothetically, if you wanted to refinance it, you'd be at like let's see, what kind of loan to value you'd be at. Like 64% at those valuations. So you're worth 21 million, you're in for 13.5. That's 64% of your end value. Mm-hmm. So you have options is what I wanted to draw out there.
Oh yeah.
And that's the big thing in a project like this. You don't want to have only one exit. You want to be able to, you can hang on to it if it works well. I mean, from a cash flow standpoint, what do you figure your average rent would be?
So the average rent is going to be somewhere around $4,000. This is a mix between 2 bedrooms and 1 bedrooms, with the 1 bedrooms getting, around $3,000 a month. We're going to have 19 2 bedrooms, and the rest are 1 bedrooms.
Gotcha. So have you run a model on that, like assessing what your taxes would likely be, what your insurance would be, and come up with whether or not that cash flows at prevailing market rate for interest?
Absolutely. So this project will only cash flow roughly 3 to 6% on average after this is fully stabilized.
3 to 6% of the asset value, or 3 to 6% of your monthly rent?
That would be 3 to 6% cash on cash returns. Excuse me. So
3 to 6% cash on cash. Okay.
Yeah. So it's gonna be like a 3 to...
which is okay though. Like that's very respectable for a lot of investors.
Yeah, I mean, especially in today's day and age. Mm-hmm. And in a place like San Diego, cash flowing, is extremely difficult to do here. As far as have we modeled it out? Oh yeah, we've got a big, robust model. So like the way the taxes work here, and one of the incentives for developing is that they're going to tax you based off of the purchase of the whatever the lot is that you initially purchased. So in this case, we've got the 3.2 million. We've got, your land and improvements. Your typical way they're going to tax that. And then they're going to just add in the cost of construction. So essentially, if our all-in costs are 13 million, and then they're basically going to tax it based off of that, and it's 1.25% essentially of that value. 1.25 is our annual tax. Yeah.
125 times. You said, we had that number, that 13.5.
Yeah.
So you're gonna pay is that real? You're gonna pay over $1 million in taxes? No. Well, I'm doing things wrong again. You'll have to.
It's okay, man. Don't worry about it.
It's one of those days. All right.
So about 162,500 in taxes annually.
Yeah, 168.5 or 168,750 is what I.
There
have.
It is. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to get an idea for what this would look like. 168,750. Insurance wise, do you know? Are you going to be like a $30,000 a year insurance bill on something like that? No, it shouldn't be anywhere near that. I should be like 10
we're
grand?
probably talking about $300 a unit annually.
Equals 300 times
30.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm usually much quicker with all this stuff.
Ouch.
All right.
No
So 100, am I doing this wrong? 300 times 30 times 12. Oh, you said per year. Get rid of the times 12.
Just get rid of the times 12. Yep.
Okay, so I got maintenance and management 5% each. Is that roughly what you guys would budget, or would you do it a little differently?
Yeah, roughly.
Okay.
What we kind of look at too, I mean, with a new build, you're going to obviously have a lot lower R&M, et cetera, and maintenance.
Yeah, but you're going to have like an allowance for life cycle items, right? Or replacement reserve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so when you blend those two in, like, do you do like a per door rate for your maintenance and then a life cycle allowance?
Yeah, we do. We basically do percentages. So I don't have it in front of me. I think 5% is very close, though.
Yeah, we're probably in the ballpark. Yeah,
It's not going to be like a lot more than that.
We are doing this on the fly in the middle of a podcast, and my brain is only half functioning today. So
overall expense ratios, like for projects like this, you're going to expect between 22 and 25%. That's what most developers are going to see on average here in San Diego for all of your expenses, the general ratio.
That's good to know, 22 and 25%. That would have been an easier thing to just ask you from the beginning, but let's
all
see
good.
Here. Yeah, you're at 22.5 as is with what I've got in here. So so looking at that, if it is worth the 21 million, I just want to run that number. Like if we run it, so at a 21 million, that's like a 5.3% cap rate. How does that sound for San Diego? Is that
that's a little high. So if I have to pull up because our true cap rate that we're expecting is around a 4 cap.
And a 4. Okay.
Yeah. So
I might have made a mistake there, but I just multiplied out your 700,000 a unit times 30.
Yeah, totally. And there could be something that I'm leaving out that I'd have to double check. But
I did run 4,000 times 30 for the rent. 4,000.
Yeah. Well, that's probably the big reason why when it came to that is because there's going to be 17 2-bedrooms that are going to get about $4,000 a month conservatively, and then 11 1-bedrooms that are probably going to get around $3,000 a month.
Let me fix that.
Yep.
3,000. That's an easy fix. So that will... Yeah, that brings the cap down to a 4.3.
Yeah.
So now we're more in the ballpark. Your expense ratio is around a 25 based on the quick and dirty stuff I did here. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now let's walk through what the financing. This is what I really wanted to get into, is what the financing would look like.
Yeah.
So let's see here. So what would you be able to get on something like that? Can you get 75% loan to value?
No, because generally speaking, with how expensive everything is here in San Diego, like you're looking at like 60% loan to cost, generally speaking, is what you can expect. But obviously that can change if we get lucky and interest rates were to go down the next 2 years considerably, because it's based off of DSCR. So, depending on the lender, they might want a 1.20 DSCR, they might want a 1.25 DSCR, but depending on their debt service coverage ratio requirements and where interest rates are at, because that's going to affect that debt payment and that calculation for DSCR. 60%, it can go up to 75% if the DSCR constraints are met, but it's generally
and
probably
you're saying 70% loan to cost though?
Yeah.
See, I'm more thinking in stabilized when you go to sort of get your permanent debt. They're not going to allow you to sort of quote unquote cash out and take some money off the table? You could,
but there's probably just not going to be enough meat on the bone to do much of a cash out refi. So like, it's not like we're going to be able to, more than likely what we'll do is keep the loan proceeds for the perm debt very close to just paying off the construction debt so we can have the highest DSCR possible.
So what you're saying is if you're in for 1.35 or 13.5 when you're done, then that's the number you're going to try and cover with your loan.
Correct. Right. That's exactly right.
Let's just run it that way then. Okay, so if you are doing that for some reason, there it goes. So is that going to be amortized on like a 30-year or would that be a 25-year?
30-year.
30-year, okay. Yeah, I was going back to what we said before. So that's why there's not meat on the bone, because you're already at 64% if you're at 13.5. 64% of what it's worth.
Right.
Okay. And that would be roughly, that is your cost. So they're not going to have that restriction. Or when you guys go back, you're going to just try and get it up to your full cost.
Say that one more time.
You're just trying to pull out money, or not pull out money. You're just trying to get a new loan that's going to match what your principal outstanding is on the existing loan. Yeah.
And the point of that is really twofold. Like, because generally speaking, with a construction loan, right, you're going to have, you know, a 2-year term, maybe 18 months to get it done. And then after that, the purpose of us refinancing is really just to have a loan that's going to cover the construction costs, which we're constrained anyways. I mean, if we could do a 50% cash out refi or something like that, obviously that would be very attractive to us. But the purpose of when we get this loan, we want to make sure a couple things. Number one, that the prepayment penalties are as low as possible. So we don't want to go trying to get max loan proceeds. Our main goal when talking to these lenders is low prepayment penalty, if not down to zero, because the intention would be to sell it within the next 2 to 3 years.
Right. So can you get one that's not a 30-year term? Like, I know they typically would refer to that as a bridge, but can you get a bridge with matching terms sort of compared to like a 30-year, like a more permanent debt?
I think it might be possible to like add, you know, get like, you know, a lower loan term with the amortization switch. You know, all of that when it comes to lenders and the time, we're not expecting to have that go our way, but there's so many things you can negotiate with lenders. Typically, if everything swings their way a little bit, if it's more favorable for the lender when it comes to loan proceeds, term, length of the loan, et cetera, then you can generally have the lower prepayment penalties. But, you know, the more proceeds you start getting, the more you start swinging it your way, then they add on the prepayment a lot. But, you know, we just want to make sure that when we actually market this property, when it's finished, that a buyer or, you know, even the selling broker isn't using that as leverage, because if you have a ticking time bomb, say 6 months left on a loan because it's on a bridge loan and you have a property listed for sale, everybody's going to know that and they're going to use it against you. And that's the main thing we want to avoid.
That's the U.S. in a nutshell. Everybody's aware of what's going on, and the vultures are circling. Which I mean, I say that affectionately. I much prefer to do business in the U.S. I just find it a way better place to do business. Okay, so what
for now
I'm digging on here is what your interest rate would be, because you said you might need to have a DSCR of 1.25 or 1.2.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah. So at the time, you know, there's some local lenders that are sizing it up now and say, you know, it could work at 1.20 for them. Like they have those requirements. Other lenders have 1.25. So it depends on which lender gives us the best terms at the time that makes sense. But that's what we're expecting between that range.
And what would so you'd be a 30-year AM, interest rate wise, are you guys going to go for like an agency loan? And what, you know, how good can you get the rate?
More than likely, we're going to need to go with a local bank. Agency debt is typically going to have stricter prepayment penalties.
Yeah,
they almost always
if you try and repay it.
Yeah, so I think that would hurt us. But, you know, that's not to say that there's no chance we would take agency debt, because who knows, you know, 2-3 years from now what that's going to look like. But more than likely, there's several smaller banks that would like have it on their books that we could get better terms with.
And would it be like 6%, 7%? Like, what are you looking at?
We're expecting closer to 7. So like 7, for perm debt, we're expecting 6 3/4 to 7, because at like the height of interest rates, like right now, that's where they're at. We're not really, you know, you could go either way with that. You could say, oh, you know, I'm going to expect 7.5, but generally speaking, somewhere between 6 3/4 and 7% is what we're expecting.
All right. So here's the part that maybe I've made a mistake here, but I've got DCR at 8.85 to 1, based on 13,500,000 30-year AM, 7%, which is 65% loan to value, which might mean that you guys aren't going to be getting that full amount, or I've made a mistake.
Yeah, I'd have to pull up our underwriting here. Let me see if I could find it.
You'd be at like 1.15 at 10 million.
Let's see. Well, you're also not including a lot of the other income. So, for example, we have storage units.
Oh, okay. So I'm missing some stuff. Okay.
Yeah,
so
I'm missing some stuff. There's also parking spaces that the average on average are gonna go for $150 a month.
So you're gonna have 150 times 30.
No, 150 times 18. So this is we're only going to have enough for 18 spots at the moment. We're working on potentially leasing spots from a lot next to us.
And you said you have storage lockers as well?
We have storage lockers. We have, how many? I think we have 18.
18. And how much would those go for a month?
About $50 a month. We also have a couple motorcycle parking spots. I think we have 4 of those that will typically go for only like $50 a month. Those are going to be cheaper than regular parking spots. We have solar. This is going to be a fully solar building that we can also kind of build back for. That'll bring in roughly $20,000 a year in gross revenue from that alone.
Gotcha. Okay, so there's a bunch of other angles here that I was missing.
Yeah, there's about, and then pet fees. Typically you're going to pay an extra $50 a month, and about 20% of the units on average will have that. We're also going to have cable bill back, which that can kind of vary, but it's not going to provide a ton of extra income.
Yeah, maybe a couple thousand a year.
Exactly. maybe $5,000 a year or something like that. But
so that's not nothing. That's quite a few extra ways to.
Yeah, when you apply it to a low cap rate, it definitely helps. For sure.
Oh yeah, that's huge. Did I just come up with so annually like an extra 70,000 on what we were looking at before. So
yeah,
my coffee's starting to kick in, so things are coming.
There we
back
go.
to me
I'm
here.
going with my Ghost energy drink here, which is like nuclear.
Oh yeah. See, I'm in the process of like trying to wean down on coffee because I'm like a three like high caffeine coffees a day kind of guy.
Me too, but I've tried, but with how busy I am, I feel like I don't want to give it up until a later date.
Yeah, that's where I've been for about the last 15 years.
Yeah, I feel you, man.
Obviously, there's some play with those numbers a little bit. I don't have your full financial model, but it's cool to have an idea of the ballpark you're in, and just what's possible. I guess the question I have for you based on this, so there's some meat on the bone for you and your partners. You basically would be splitting $8-9 million of equity when you're done.
Yes.
So
Correct.
That's the angle. Buy the lots, develop them, get them to stabilized, sell them, and basically highest and best use. You're making that spread.
Yeah, exactly. And our goal with all of these properties is highest and best use. How many units can we fit on here that make the most sense? For this particular sub-market. And there's a lot that goes into it. And we have numerous partners that have built a lot of projects in this exact market that work with us as well. But to put in perspective too on this versus value add multifamily, because I think that perspective here in San Diego provides a lot too, because basically on average, if you're going to buy in this exact same submarket, at least, which is Pacific Beach, if you're going to buy a value add multifamily, depending on its location and how close it is to the beach, and if it was, for example, in the exact same place this one is, you're going to expect to spend north of $500,000 a door. And that's a value add project. So you're probably going to have to put in, if you're going to do a lot to the interior and exterior, easily another $25,000 to $50,000 a unit, depending on how good you have a job you want to do. So your all-in cost on a value-add project in San Diego is going to be something in the ballpark north of $600,000 per unit.
So you're in 600 versus your model, they're worth 650, but you're in for significantly less. I think you said 450 is the number we were working with.
That is correct. And with a different risk profile, though, obviously, development has an entirely different risk profile and return profile and how that looks over time. But these value-add projects, one of the things, not that I'm like against value-add projects anymore. I still have them in my portfolio and I still like them. It's just I take what the defense has given me, I guess is the best way I could put it. But here in San Diego, if you buy a value-add multifamily, you're going to have rent control laws applied to you. So you're capped at how much you can increase rent on existing tenants every year. With this brand new development, we don't have any rent control applied to us for the next 15 years. Then you also oftentimes might be inheriting some bad tenants.
Of course, yeah.
And if you're inheriting those tenants, it's a lot harder to get them out so that you can do your value add plan in places like San Diego. We've all heard of cash for keys. It's not uncommon for a tenant to not want to leave, keep paying their rent, and people give them $20,000 just to leave so they can do their value add plan. So there's a lot of things like with the value add play here that just make it so much harder to make a good return. Not that it's not possible. I don't want anyone to, claim that that's what I'm saying. But we just think that and believe in with this, development model that we're really reducing our risk. We're really reducing our overall expense ratios. I mean, you buy a value-add deal for $550,000 a door in San Diego, your expense ratios are going to be 50 to 60%. They'll be through the roof because of they're all built in the 50s. So there's just a lot of benefits to owning brand new.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I know other investors where the only thing they do now, like they're very seasoned investors, and the only thing they do now is ground up construction for their multifamilies, especially here in Ontario. Similar, like people kind of joke that California and Ontario are basically the same because of like,
I'm sure they are. Yeah.
Politics, like very tenant friendly, all that stuff, taxation, very similar. So yeah, you can't kick tenants out here. And in terms of the actual rent control, they kept changing it, but now it's as of anything built after 2018 has no limit to how much you can increase rent. So that's why for a lot of people, they just changed their game plan. Now they want to build new because then they'll have no rent control. They can just build their
it's a huge incentive, and it's like basically a required incentive if you ask me. Otherwise, like people aren't, because especially when you build a new apartment, you're going to go through a lease up phase, meaning the first people that rent out apartment units are generally getting a deal because they need to lease it up as quickly as possible so they can get some top line income coming in and some gross rents coming in. And then usually in the subsequent years after that, once it's stabilized, they're going to get a lot of rent growth and push those rents up because they can afford to have units sit on the market a little bit longer and build that up. And so you have this whole lease up phase and plan and strategy for new construction. And if you were to take that away and cap how much they can raise rents, a lot of developers just wouldn't do it. So then you're not getting new housing.
Yeah, that's what's happening here. Like I don't know if it's slowing down where you are, but new construction is just coming to a darn near halt. So the short supply of housing here is just getting exacerbated by that problem because there was already a substantially short supply in Ontario and Canada in general. Like Canada, the leadership's insane and brought in like 1.2 million people over the course of a year when the country in a best case scenario is going to be adding about 225,000 new homes in a year. So just like asinine. And that's been the pattern ongoing. So you add that we're already short supplied, and now developers are just saying, well, with the cost restrictions and the tax environment and all these things and the uncertainty of where market values are going, projects are on pause. So
was the 1 million for Ontario alone?
No, it's Canada as a whole, but the majority of them come to Ontario. So
well, I mean,
Ontario's
that's probably where most of the jobs are.
Yeah, a lot of the jobs. Alberta's another one, but because when somebody's thinking about immigrating, if they're not going to the U.S., it's a lot harder to immigrate to the U.S. Legally. They can legally come to Canada from India, and they're all thinking Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. Those are like the three places they're really thinking about. Yeah. So they don't come thinking, oh, let's go to Saskatchewan. Nobody. Have you even heard of that?
I don't know. Is that like pardon me for saying this if this offends anyone? Is that like hillbilly Canada?
I don't know if it's hillbilly, but it's like the Midwest. Like it's just cornfields, wheat fields. Okay. Yeah, more wheat fields, like the breadbasket they call it. Rolling hills, and just they call it the prairie provinces. So it's central Canada. It's cold as heck in the winter, and hot summers and farming, basically.
Yeah, but I think that's a really good analogy or a good demonstration you just gave of like. The sides to immigration. Yes, people want to be nice and let people come to their country, but when you have a housing crisis already, there is a cost to that. All of these people need a place to live, and when you have a very short supply, this makes the issue a little harder to solve.
Yeah, like from a macro perspective, Canada's I'm assuming they are logically. There's a logical thought process here that they're trying to solve the fact that we have an aging population. And like the millennials aren't really having kids. So you've got all the boomers that are about to retire. So now they need to bring in young working age, Indians and whoever else wants to immigrate here to be the working age population to support the retiring population. So it's like a double, it's a catch-22 situation because if they don't immigrate the people, then the GDP is just going to fall like a rock because GDP per capita is falling like a rock in Canada. And if they do, then nobody's going to be able to afford a home because the demand just far outweighs the supply.
So really, it sounds like what the politicians need to do is, hey, if you're going to do this, guys, we have to increase housing supply to levels that we've never done before. I mean, if you've got to quadruple the housing supply, you need to make some legislation right now to incentivize private money to do that.
Which they sort of are. And I'm sure you're probably you're describing similar things in California. So they've eliminated the sales tax on purpose-built rentals. They're doing different things to sort of soften the blow there. But then when they just make this new legislation about capital gains and now it's going to be 66% instead of 50, it's like you're literally going the exact opposite direction you should if these people are going to do that project. So yeah, it is what it is. But I do want to talk to you about what your perceived risks of these projects are and how you mitigate them. You did mention that value add is sort of a lower risk play, but there's not as much meat on the bone.
Correct.
I think logically that makes sense to anybody. Talk to me about the entitlement process. At what point you're getting in? Is the zoning already there, or is it in the city's master plan that would allow density in those areas? Like, what's your process to mitigate the perceived risk?
So first, I'll kind of mention some of the perceived risks. And you're right, the entitlement process and permitting process, for everybody that's wondering what we're talking about, getting the actual permits and permission to build this. It's usually going to be, it's also a time thing, because your risk is also how long is it? Let me, hold on, I'm going to back up. The way I like to think of it is, and what makes this so risky, is there's so much that's out of your hands. So a great analogy is the James Webb Telescope has something like, 300 single point failures. I don't remember what the number was, but essentially if any one of those points were to fail during deployment, then the whole thing, it won't work. And in many ways, I think real estate and in particular development can be very similar, because when we go through the entitlement process, so step one is the architect and the architect team. And I've learned the hard way that depending on who you pick and how much money you're willing to spend can make a big difference in how long it takes you to get your permits. Perfect example. The first development project we did is a 10 unit. And that company that did the 10 unit takes on way too many projects. They have something like over 500 projects right now. It took them 9 months before the design schematics and building drawings, et cetera, were finished so we can submit for permitting. Conversely, our 30-unit apartment with a much more experienced and more expensive architect is getting it done in 3 to 4 months. So I think that there's risk in who you choose for team members, namely the architect. How experienced are they with this? How well do they know the regulations? Because then once they submit for permits, there's now the risk of how good of a job did they do putting that package together for the city? Are there going to be way longer laundry lists of comments from the city that they have to now go and correct? Again, the first people we ever hired, their attention to detail was so poor that we had to resubmit. There was tons of things they got wrong. This isn't the case with the better architect. So, that is just a huge piece that you really have to nail down and know that you've got the right team together. And then when you're going through the entitlement process, there's risk for the timelines. The city can, say, on average, it's taking us 12 months to get through the entitlement process, and then it takes you 18. So you have to plan for the worst with these things, because there's not really much you can do. I mean, you can have a great architect that's responding quickly and promptly to the comments from the city and then submitting the package back so they can review it again. But at the end of the day, the city's bandwidth is also a risk. Then as you go through the entitlement process, you have holding costs. So however long that takes, if you've got $3.2 million of real estate with a loan on it, with a high debt bridge loan, every single month you're losing $22,000. So every month that ticks along costs more and more and more. Then when you get to the actual construction phase, what contractors you've selected and their experience level and bandwidth at the time matters tremendously. So anyone listening to this, that's really one of your biggest risks is the general contractor. And on top of that, not only how quickly the contractor can get it done, labor costs are a risk. Labor costs have continuously increased. So you have to plan for, a 5 to 10% increase in labor cost each year, and hope that doesn't get even worse. It's obviously impossible to predict. But with development, you're essentially putting more things outside of your control, and that's where a lot of the risk comes from. And you can mitigate these risks by bringing on extremely talented people. So how have we mitigated some of these risks? One of our partners, James Hines, who is a general partner for us, he's a project manager in commercial real estate construction. He's done over $100 million in construction. He has a master's in mechanical engineering and is very smart when it comes to analyzing the contract with the general contractors, being able to do a better job than I can do at vetting these contractors, actually walking the sites and as a project manager to make sure that good quality craftsmanship's being done, because that matters too, and that's a risk. Case in point, I live in a building called Luma Apartments in Little Italy, San Diego, a really nice neighborhood. This is a Class A new apartment complex. They built it about 5-6 years ago. And since I've lived here for 3 years now, air conditioning units throughout the building keep failing. And they've spent, I don't even know how much money, but a ton of money ripping out walls, trying to fix air conditioning units, giving tenants credits on their rent. I was one of them. For 3 months last summer, I didn't have any air conditioning. Why? Because the contractor that installed those air conditioners did a crappy job and didn't do it right. And now this building that's brand new that you would assume would have a low expense ratio has expenses out the wazoo for HVAC. So again, that's one of the risks that we've mitigated by bringing in James Hines. Another risk we've mitigated is having a much better architectural team that's been doing this for 30 years and has built most of the buildings close to the beach. Mm-hmm. And we're also partnering with another developer who has built over 600 units in this submarket. So I think experience is so incredibly important with ground up development. Ground up development is not something you jump into. Like, you can get away with value add multifamily and kind of slowly getting into that business without a ton of experience and doing okay. I think development's just an entirely different beast. It's an entirely different kind of business. So we've also mitigated risk by bringing on, for example, there are consultants that exist that worked in the city's permitting department for 20 years. So we brought one on as a consultant that we pay, and she not only knows how the city wants to see it, what they're thinking when they're looking at our entitlement package, and she knows everyone that works in the department. So we've got somebody that essentially has an inside line that can help ensure that we're getting through that entitlement process as quickly as possible. So I hope I didn't go on too long of a tangent there, Andrew, but that's some of the ways.
It's funny. I was thinking multiple times how long I just let you talk in this episode, because you just say good stuff, and you don't even need me here. I'll just let you talk. But as far as the entitlement process goes, are you going into something that allows the use? Well, the present zoning allows the use, or are you applying for a permit to build and a change of zoning and an amendment to an official plan all at the same time?
No, we don't have to do all that kind of stuff. This stuff, we're going into a specific program where we don't have to ask for variances, et cetera.
Nothing like that. So zoning is in place, it stays. You're just applying for a permit.
Correct. We're just applying for a permit, but there are caveats depending on where you live. So I do want to make sure I put this out there for anyone listening. If you're in the coastal zone, so there's a coastal overlay zone. And essentially, there's a couple extra hoops you have to go through, because you have to get a coastal development permit. And the risks there are some timeline risks that get added, because now the community planning department for Pacific Beach is going to look at your plans and make sure that it meets their criteria as far as how it's going to look in the neighborhood. So they want to make sure you're not building a building that's going to stick out like a sore thumb, right? That's the best way I could sum it up. You can't build a pink building if they don't want that. So you've got to, that's another risk that's mitigated with a great architect. They've put projects through. They know what the city the community planning area wants to see, and can make sure that you don't submit it and then they send it right back and say, absolutely not. We don't want that shape, or we don't want that building color, or we don't want the balconies to look like this, et cetera.
So you've given some perfect examples of how knowledge mitigates risk, and people, the right team, mitigates risk. Like having somebody that worked in the city in that department working on your team, I can't imagine that there was anybody that wouldn't think that's a huge risk mitigation.
Oh,
now you understand, like, oh, what are the odds? You ask the former employee, what are the odds they say no? If they did, why would they? If they did, how would they, how would they be saying no? What would we do? And you can map out like sort of your decision tree of what you would do in all the different circumstances, and what's our worst possible outcome? What's our most likely outcome? And are we okay with all that? That would be very, very empowering. As a scenario. So absolutely. I like that you've done that. Like, if you don't have the competency, it is risky. Bring somebody in that does, so that you can, and hopefully there's still enough meat on the bone. Like, it sounds like you've got a lot of hands in the cookie jar.
There are,
so to speak.
Absolutely. It's expensive. I mean, the architect alone is $250,000. I mean, there's a lot of, and you get what you pay for when it comes to stuff like this. And if anyone's thinking about doing something like this, you have to bring on the best. That's the best way I could put it. If you save money, you're going to lose money.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Cheaper is not cheaper. It's going to cost you. So you're going to get really good help. You just need to make sure that your deal makes sense. And now the numbers you're proposing to me, you're coming in at 65% all in of what it's worth. That there's a good buffer in there. That's exactly. That's you getting paid for the risk you're taking, and then you're mitigating that risk the best you can. And
that's what I tell people, because do I like development as a play? Obviously, I'm doing it. I obviously like value add multifamily, but there's a couple things like with development plays, there are some risks that we make very clear to our investors, but there's an asymmetric return to account for the added risk you're taking on. And it's a potential asymmetric return that you can get for taking on that additional risk. And there's all kinds of things that could happen that even mitigating all of this stuff can still be out of your control. If we go into a trade war with China over the next 2 years, that might cause issues. Why? Because a lot of the materials used to make concrete come from China. There's other materials used in construction that come from there, or any other number of countries that we could have trade issues with. And that could affect the price of materials that we use, or affect how we source those materials. So there's a lot of different things that could go on, but I think it's important to literally write down and analyze each individual risk and come up with some way that you can mitigate each and every one of them, or pivot if needed.
I love that. That's a great idea. And I've always said you need to have your plan A, B, and C, and stuff like you're doing. Like, you have to have plan A, B, and C at the high level, but then you got to have all kinds of if-then statements and decisions that are going to be made throughout your entire process when stuff doesn't go as you would ideally want it to. Correct. Or when it goes a certain way. So yeah, that's super smart. That's high level. Now tell me, this is obviously more medium to longer term money for you. What's the short-term money, or are you just living on the last project for several years because they're so good, or do you have shorter term? Like, are you living off of rental income? Like, what pays for your daily lifestyle?
That's a great question, because every project that I do as a general partner, I really don't make much money at all until we sell. Most of my money comes from my short-term rentals. That's what I live off of. I've got 4 short-term rentals that provide most of my daily income. In the short term, we do, take acquisition fees, but just being frank, I hardly see much of that because we use that for overhead for our business, paying for CoStar, paying for employees and admin and all the different software, et cetera, to keep the business afloat. That's, where most of that acquisition money goes to. So I don't really see much money as a general partner. And people listening to this, that's something you got to keep in mind, by the way. Like, even if you're going to be a general partner on value add, you're not going to make a ton of money until you sell properties. And then if you're doing development deals, nobody sees any money until year 3 or 4 once the property's built. There is no cash flow because it doesn't exist yet. So that's something,
it's just a cash drain.
Yeah, it's a cash stream until it gets built. So, it's a different play. If you need cash flow day one, development's not for you because you got to build it first.
This is why development's something I've encouraged people to stay away from unless you know what you're doing. Another nice scenario is if you have a developable parcel or a developable piece of land attached to a cash flowing property. So you don't have a gun to your head while you're going for your approvals. You get all your approvals before you ever raise equity or debt. You just, your existing cash flow pays for it. So those are scenarios I really like. Doing what you're doing, you've got to have a really good team to mitigate all that risk, which you sound like you do. And then you've got to have something paying for your daily lifestyle, which it sounds like you've got it figured out. So that's a really, really great picture you've painted. Shawn, what do you want the audience to know that we haven't talked about?
Oh man, I think that the first thing that just popped in my brain while we were discussing all of this is if you're listening to this episode and want to do anything that I've just talked about, I mean, honestly, even if you just want to get into the real estate game, I think you have to keep in mind that this is a long game. To really make good money in real estate, I mean, like I say, you have to keep in mind 5 years. Quick, easy money in real estate, those days are behind us. So play the long game and understand that regardless of what business model you choose or what business plan you choose, understand that your payday is going to come down the line, and don't stress about it too much, because I've stressed about it too much before. And I would also say don't quit your job too early. Mm-hmm. A lot of people listening to these podcasts want to quit their job as soon as possible. I quit mine as soon as possible. Hoard as much income as you can until you can't stand it. That's the other thing I want people to know, which may go against what you hear from a lot of other people.
That's great advice. No, I think people need to keep their personal situations very tight. Like, don't waste money, save money on your personal situation. That gives you the flexibility to take on projects. That gives you the flexibility to take a little perceived risk, educated, calculated gambles. But if you're hurting in a personal situation, how are you going to make things work professionally? So very, very good point.
And to piggyback off of that, one final thing is that keeping in mind as a general partner, if things don't go wrong, you're the one that's supposed to have the money. You need money to make up for some things sometimes. If you forgot something, that's something I think a lot of people don't realize unless you plan on doing capital calls all the time. But all the big general partners I know, when things have kind of gone astray, they front the money themselves. So they don't have to ask investors, and they tell, hey guys, I'm going to float this money. We're going to get this dam fixed or whatever it is, and keep moving.
Yeah, that's a good point. So as far as general partner, is that how you're structuring this development here? The one that we just talked about, the two properties side by side?
Yeah, that's a syndication. So we got general partners and limited partners. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And how many would you have in a typical project like that? How many different different investors are coming in as limited partners?
So this one has just a little over 40. So for these kind of projects, we've had 30 to 40 for some of the bigger ones. On average.
And how do you raise? Like, where is it? Your podcast brings in a lot of the people, I would assume.
Yeah, the podcast brings in people. Honestly, like the primary way I've raised money is just from personal relationships. So I'll list all the ways first. Personal relationships, and I'll explain more on that in a second. The podcast does trickle people in and does great. Being a guest on other people's podcasts is great. Real estate meetups. Or, I've gotten a couple from those, but typically, in my opinion, that's mostly newbies going to those, not as many people with tons of money. Meeting people at conferences, but like generally speaking, I get the most bang for my buck from people that I see regularly. They're friends of mine. I meet them at a local business club, and we go out to dinner and chat about things and play golf together, etc. And they hear about what I'm doing and get more comfortable over time. Almost like I'd say 90% of my investors are people that I've known for at least a year, and another 5% come from referrals, and then the rest are people that the few people left that I don't know on a super personal level. So in my opinion, if you're listening to this and want to raise a lot of capital, keep your calendar full, take people out to dinner a lot, and get close to as many people as you can. And they're going to learn about what you're doing and be more comfortable investing.
Yeah, like just make business friends with them, because you're going to end up talking business. What are you up to? Oh, we're working on this. Well, tell me about that.
Exactly.
Yeah, we've been sharing. So my business partner and I have been sharing about what we're doing with our off-market acquisition in Florida. And we've got people reaching out for one thing or another. Some, want to lend, some want to get involved in some way. And if you share about what you're doing, but then, yes, of course, it's about nurturing those relationships, staying close to them. And you're a podcast host too. And I want to form all those connections and spend all that time. I used to find hosting my own meetup was helpful, but then more recently, I think people are just less kind of keen on real estate investing right now in Ontario because of the way things are. So the local real estate meetup biz, and we were never charging, is just it wasn't really getting the traction anymore. So trying to figure the way to do that, to do what you've said, like, and how you do that on scale. But I guess a lot of the people that you're mentioning, some of them might have been a podcast listener at some point, and now they're a friend, or now there's somebody that you see fairly regularly.
Yeah, it all plays in. And here's why. Because like maybe the podcast, people aren't reaching out saying, yeah, I heard about you from your podcast, but the podcast could also nurture investors. So if they listen to me from time to time on their way to work and hear me talking about my development projects, that could make them feel more comfortable about it. They're getting more educated on what I'm doing. So it makes them feel a little bit more, they might be willing to trust me more with projects like that. And I think that all of that stuff puts you as a person of authority on the subject. So it's important to do everything. But we also I think Instagram has been really helpful, not in the sense that like getting a bunch of followers, but getting people excited about deals. So I hopefully I'm not taking too much of your time, but as a perfect example, when we were doing the Pacific Beach project, we announced a webinar that's, a week and a half, 2 weeks away. And every single day leading up to that webinar, we're putting out Instagram content that's like really well made marketing materials and well edited, with drone footage, et cetera, of the site, the neighborhood. Another one will be highlighting the architect, showing a lot of his projects, et cetera. Another one will be demonstrating how we had one that was demonstrating the availability of new units in Pacific Beach and how rare they are, how at any moment you can search for new rentals and there's almost zero available. So we'll do all this leading up to the webinar and keep pushing the webinar with a call to action to register. And by the time we got to the webinar, we had over 100 people on it. So I think doing everything you can to market a deal as you're leading up to it and getting people excited helps as well with your investors.
Yeah, that's a action plan right there that you just gave. And that I could see totally how that would work. I've done similar stuff. It's just all about planning. You have to have that planned out ahead of time, and then you have to have it on your calendar. You have your date set, you have your release of all your content. It's all managed. You got a team to handle that. So that it requires a team to do that kind of thing. But if you've got it and you execute on it, it's like there's no magic there. There's no secret. It's just doing the actions that have worked for other people and would work for.
Yeah, exactly. And there's not like one single thing. It's like all of that stuff together. Like I can't tell you with 100% certainty which one of those was the one that made someone want to invest, but I could tell you that it all helps.
For sure. Okay, Shawn, yeah, we've gone on a good long time here, and I certainly think we could go on longer, but we should put a pin in it for now. Where do people find you and follow you?
So the easiest way is you can go to my personal website, which is investorshawn.com, and I spell Shawn SHAWN. You can also go to my company website, which is takeoffcapital.com, takeoffcapital.com, and either one of those you can easily figure out how to find me and reach me, and you can find me on Instagram as well, first name _ last name. And if you ever want to reach out and chit chat with me, just let me know.
All right, awesome, Shawn. This was great. It's really, really great getting to chat with you twice in a week and learn about what you're doing. So I'm looking forward to following some of these projects now that we've chatted and seeing you have loads of success.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Andrew. I appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Shawn. We'll talk soon.
Talk soon.